Today we have one reading, Exodus chapter 20, verses 1 through 17. This is the giving of the Ten Commandments. Listen for the word of the Lord. Then God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them, or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing children for the iniquity of parents, to the third and the fourth generation of those who reject me, but showing steadfast love to the 1,000th generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not make wrongful use of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not acquit anyone who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but on the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you, your son or your daughter, your male or female slave, your livestock, or the alien resident in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, but rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and consecrated it. Honor your father and your mother, so that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or male or female slave, or ox, or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
This past year, I have been a student pastor at Community Presbyterian Church in Kendall Park, New Jersey. It's right by New Brunswick, about 45 minutes from here. Throughout Lent, the lectionary took us through the covenants of the Old Testament, leading up to Easter and the new covenant that Jesus institutes. On Ash Wednesday, we began with the covenant of Adam and God's promise to clothe Adam and Eve. In the next covenant, God makes a promise to protect Noah. Then it was Abraham and his wife Sarah. God tells Abraham to leave all that he knows, his family, his friends, his country, and travel to an unknown land. God promises to bless Abraham. And through him, a great nation will come that will be as vast as the stars in the sky. In this covenant, God's promise to Abraham is that he and his descendants belong to God. They will be God's treasured possession. So a good portion of the book of Genesis, the first book of the Bible, is about this great family that begins with Abraham. Abraham's wife Sarah gives birth to Isaac. Isaac marries Rebekah, and they have Jacob. Jacob marries Rachel, and they have Joseph. At the end of the first part of the story, Genesis, Joseph and his family, and his siblings' families, are all living in Egypt. And so Genesis ends, and the second book begins, Exodus. In chapter 1 of Exodus, it says, the Hebrews were fruitful, and they multiplied. They had lots and lots of babies, and this one small family becomes a very, very large community. To fully embrace and understand the Ten Commandments that we just read, I believe we have to read them not only in light of the previous covenants, but also in light of the story of the Hebrews, in the context of what has just happened to them, and how at the beginning of this reading they find themselves at the foot of Mount Sinai. When the king of Egypt, Pharaoh, when he sees their growing numbers, he begins to oppress them with forced labor, and the Hebrews become slaves. They work, and they work, and they work. They place brick upon brick all day, every day. God hears their cry and sends Moses, who was Hebrew too, who had grown up as a prince in Egypt, to lead the Hebrews out of slavery and Egyptian oppression. Moses and his brother Aaron have this great stare down with Pharaoh to see who has the more powerful God. The God of the Hebrews wins, and they march out of Egypt and slavery and Pharaoh's oppression. After wandering in the wilderness, they finally reach Mount Sinai. Moses ascends to the top of the mountain to speak to God. There is this dark smoke, thunder at the top of the mountain. And God makes another covenant with God's people. Moses is on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. And as he walks down the mountain, he holds 2 stone tablets in his hands, each containing 5 commands from God. Now, this scene is a very famous scene. Moses walking down the mountain, the commandments, especially in film. The first movie that comes to mind is Cecil B. DeMille's 1956 movie, The Ten Commandments, with Charlton Heston and his big booming voice. Pharaoh, let my people go. In this version, Moses, played by Charlton Heston, he walks down the mountain with the 2 stone tablets, and he discovers that the Hebrews have already broken the covenant, the second commandment, and they've made a golden calf, and they're worshiping it. Charlton Heston, Moses, he's angry, he's livid. It's almost like he has smoke coming out of his ears, and he says, "You have sinned a great sin in the sight of God. You are not worthy to receive these 10 commandments." Moses throws the 2 stone tablets at the golden statue, breaking them into 100 pieces. The second movie is from a great and well-known Jewish theologian who was also a great writer and director, Mel Brooks. In his 1981 movie, History of the World, Part 1, Moses is walking on a mountain without the commandments, and God says to him, "Moses, I will give you my laws, and you will take them unto my people." Moses says, "Yes, Lord." He walks back up the mountain. A couple seconds later, he walks down with 3 stone tablets in his hand. He says, "Lord, I shall give these laws unto the people." And then he says, hear me, the Lord Jehovah has given you these 15. And suddenly this tablet in his right hand falls, shatters in 100 pieces. He looks up and says, "Boy, these 10 commandments." Even though the Charlton Heston version describes the scene in the Bible, Moses does come down from the mountain, and he finds the Hebrews worshiping a golden calf, and he's angry. Though the language he uses is not exactly found in Exodus. I'm interested in the Mel Brooks version. Not because it's hilarious, which it is, but because it helps us to remember the original intent of this covenant. In the Charlton Heston version, we get this feeling that commandments are only a means to show the Hebrews the many ways they will and have messed up and failed. It's almost a way to simply produce shame in the Hebrews. In the Mel Brooks version, the covenant is a gift from God. There is this sense of wonder and excitement in this version. This is a gift from God to a community that God loves. Before their exodus from Egypt, all the community knew was slavery. They were born into it, And day in and day out, they place brick upon brick upon brick, all day and every day. So did God free them from oppression to enslave them again, to show them how bad and evil they are? No. Out of God's great love for this people, God rescued them from slavery to live in relationship with God, to live a covenantal life with God and with each other. These commandments are a gift from God. At the very beginning of our reading, Exodus 20, verse 1, the text says, "Then God spoke all of these words." Did you catch that? It doesn't say, "Then God spoke all these commandments or laws or rules." It simply says, "Then God spoke all these words." When we come to these words without knowing and understanding the previous covenants of Adam and Noah and Abraham, they are only commandments. They are only rules, laws. And they lose the sense that they are a gift. And in some ways, they become hollow. Don't do this. Don't do this. Don't do this. Why? Because I said so. Because they're rules. Yes, they absolutely contain some no-brainers for how to live with each other. Do not murder. Do not steal. Honor your parents. Yes. But when we read them in light of the previous covenants, Adam, I will clothe you. Noah, I will protect you. Abraham, you belong to me. They can now be understood as more than just mere commandments, but directions, teachings, a way of life, a blueprint for life. It is a way to structure and govern how to live together in community, with God and with each other. This covenant is a gift from God to a people who already belong to God, to order their common life together. These words, these teachings, these laws are seen in a whole new light when you already know that you belong to God. There is a progression in these covenants. I will clothe you, protect you, you belong to me. And now, this is how we live together in community with God and with each other. And with the God of Adam and Noah and Abraham, who led us out of an oppressed life and now introduces us to a whole new life. This is a way to exemplify how to live when one knows they belong to God. Walter Brueggemann is this great Old Testament scholar, also a Presbyterian. He says this about the covenant of Moses. He says, these commands might be taken not as a series of rules, but as a proclamation from God's own mouth of how God shall be practiced by this community of liberated slaves. Practiced. Very interesting way to put it. But if we read this in light of the previous covenants, in their progression and in their deepening, I think Brueggemann is right on. This is how we live in community with God and with each other. This is how we practice this life with God. But we practice this life already knowing that we belong to God.